What's going on, everyone? This is Theo from Headphones.com, and today I have a review for you guys of the Etymotic EVO. If you're not familiar with Etymotic, they basically created the first in-ear monitor in 1991. It's also sort of a running joke that they solved portable audio in that same year just because the ER4 has consistently been at the top of its game in its respective price bracket, and it basically remains one of the most solid single balanced armature IMs on the market. So you can imagine that expectations are high whenever Etymotic releases a new product, and that's exactly what we have here with the EVO. Short for Etymotic Evolution, today I'll be taking a look at how that stacks up in practice. Full disclosure, this unit was provided for review by Etymotic, courtesy of a Headphone tour they are currently running. As always, what follows are my honest thoughts and opinions to the best of my ability. Let's take a look. Okay, as usual, I'm not going to explore the build and the accessories too closely, and because what I received was a tour unit, it can't be considered representative of what actual buyers of the IM will receive. That being said, if we take a look at the EVO itself, you can see that it sort of eschews the more traditional Etymotic design. A lot of their old IMs made use of a cylindrical design from the body to the spout itself. With the EVO, you can see that this only extends to the spout, and from there onwards, it follows a more traditional IM design that should better conform to most people's ears. Something else different about the EVO is that it makes use of stainless steel for the build. So it is substantially heavier than the aluminum and the plastic builds of past Etymotic IMs. Pretty solid construction overall, and you can definitely tell that some serious work went into the machining of this IM. Now that being said, I cannot say the same of the cable that is being used with the EVO. This is one of the worst cables that I have seen in recent memory. Like, scratch that, probably one of the worst cables that I have seen hands down. It is spiderweb levels of thin, and it feels like twine almost, I want to say. The worst part though is that the cable is substantially heavier than the EVO, so there's a very strong tendency for the wire to sort of come unlooped from behind your ear when you're moving around, like this. I honestly cannot understand how this made it into production. And something else that I'm going to point out is that this does not use standard MMCX or 2-pin connectors either. It uses proprietary T2 connectors, which a lot of people are not going to have access to, at least not with cables that they currently own. So yeah, again, this is probably the worst cable that I've ever held, and I really hope this gets swapped out later down the line quick at that. Okay, so let's talk about the actual sound signature of the EVO. What you have with the EVO is a sound that doesn't stray too far from the classic Etymotic sound. So starting with the bass response, it sits between the ER4XR and the ER2XR in terms of quantity. The quality of it itself is also quite good for balanced armature. I would say it's quite tight and clean, and it also seems to have a little bit more texture than some other balanced armature IMs that I've heard. That being said, it is no substitution for a dynamic driver, and it doesn't hold a candle to even the ER2XR in terms of slam and decay. But if all you're looking for is decent bass and you want it to be present when it should be present, I think that the EVO will suffice. So moving into the mid-range, again, you have a very classic interpretation of the neutral reference sound, so flat lower mids contrasted to an elevated peanut compensation and upper mid-range. I would stay away if you're looking for warm, thick vocals because that's definitely not what this is. Notes on the EVO are definitely leaner to emphasize a high degree of transparency and vocal intelligibility. Something else that I want to point out is that the EVO has quite a bit of grit in its decay. This is something that's not uncommon to a lot of balanced armature reference monitors, and personally I'm not a fan of it, but I know that there are listeners who like it, so I'll let you guys decide whether that's a good or bad thing. So overall, a pretty balanced sound signature up until we get to the treble. And at this point, I would really direct your attention away from the measurements, as they don't reflect what I think I personally hear. The thing about the EVO is that it's going to sit differently in your ear than it does in the coupler when I take the measurement, so I don't think you can necessarily draw solid conclusions from the measurements alone. And instead, what I hear is a small peak at 7K Hertz and then a very strong peak at 9K Hertz. The 8K Hertz peak on the measurements is actually not really audible. I mean, it's there, but it's not really noticeable in practice. After 9K Hertz, the EVO rolls off pretty strongly, but I want to say it comes back up at around 14 or 15K Hertz. This is not dissimilar to the ER2XR, which definitely has a cylinder resonance in that region that I can pick up on a sine sweep. The thing about this resonance though is that it is not strong enough relative to the rest of the treble response for me to really hear it in practice. And as a result, the EVO generally comes off as lacking air. And in tandem with the 9K Hertz peak and the sort of grit I was talking about earlier, the treble response does sound a little bit abrasive to my ears, and generally I'm not too impressed with it. In fact, I would say that the older Etymotic IMs like the ER2XR and the ER4XR have better treble responses than the EVO does. For technical performance, the EVO is a strong performer. In fact, I would say it's the most technical Etymotic IM that I've heard to date. Notes are articulated cleanly without any noticeable blunting, although there is some of that characteristic balanced armature timbre where the notes themselves feel a little bit weightless, maybe plasticky at times. Imaging is an often cited weakness of the Etymotic IMs. I think that the EVO is a small step forward in this regard. It definitely does not sound as closed in terms of soundstage width, but it still maintains the clap center image and lack of depth that plagues their other IMs. Dynamics are also a small step forward on the EVO. It certainly does not sound as flat as the ER4XR, which was quite possibly one of the most boring IMs that I've heard, and I also do find microdynamics to be surprisingly alive in the mid-range. Okay, so let's come back to that question I asked at the beginning of this review, which was whether the EVO is truly an evolution from its predecessors. And the answer to that, I think, is a little bit more nuanced than a yes or no. On one hand, I think that Etymotic's other IMs, the ER2, the ER3, the ER4, they're all tuned better than the EVO. The EVO has a good tuning for sure, but it stumbles in the treble response where it's just a little bit more abrasive than I think is warranted. But the EVO picks up the slack in terms of technical performance where it's decidedly an upgrade over those IMs. I think that the real wildcard here is the ER2XR, which uses a single dynamic driver. So they're not strictly comparable, but speaking frankly, I think I would prefer the ER2XR. The timbre on it is cleaner, the bass response of course is in another league entirely, and the treble response as well is smoother if not equally as dark in the air frequencies. So personally I think it would be a stretch to say that the EVO is a full evolution from its predecessors, but I do want to make clear that it is still a very good IM that is competitive for $500. If they could just remove that very janky cable, I think I would be happy to recommend it. And yeah, I think that's going to do it for this review. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.